what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Friday, May 5th, 2017. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. And a happy Cinco de Mayo to everybody on out there, which apparently is commemoration of a tremendous battle that Mexico won. It's not their Independence Day. That's actually in September. Interestingly enough, not everybody's getting all that enthusiastic about it. Donald Trump is skipping the traditional Cinco de Mayo celebration at the White House and basically saying that it's not historically important to the United States. And this is one of the things I'm actually in agreement with Donald Trump about, because the White House represents basically the political center of the United States of America, and I think the White House should observe American holidays and pull back from all this globalist multi-whatchamajiggas thing that they're doing here, that they have to celebrate everybody's holidays. Remember, as Teddy Roosevelt said, foreigners are welcome to come here and become citizens, but understand they're moving to this country. They're not bringing the old country with them, and they're certainly free to celebrate holidays in their own homes and their own communities, but it's a little unrealistic to expect the entire nation to get excited about every single holiday that's brought in from another country. Next, we'll be out there in the town square dancing in circles and sacrificing a live goat or something like that. Now, turning to the more serious news. Oh, and of course, a reminder, yes, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 of the show today, and we've got so much stuff to be talking about. Let's start with North Korea. The Armada continues to grow. There are, of course, the U.S. Fleet centered around the Carl Vinson. Japanese ships, or one Japanese ship, has joined the fleet, and now the French government is sending a Mistral-class warship to join in the exercise. The Mistrals are amphibious assault helicopter carriers that were used in the Libyan War in 2011, and of course the Mistrals were at the center of this deal where Russia bought 4 of them from France, and under pressure from the U.S., France canceled the deal, which was tacky, and now they've sold the completed Mistral hulls to Egypt. Egypt has now gone up to Russia and said, we want to hire you to put in all the weapon systems because of that wonderful job you did with the USS Donald Cook. It doesn't look like anybody's backing down from this confrontation in North Korea, which is making everybody here in Hawaii nervous, especially with all these articles in the newspapers about when North Korea attacks, the Hawaiians are only going to have a few minutes to get into a shelter, as if we actually had public bomb shelters here, which we don't. But now North Korea's government is accusing the CIA of a plot to assassinate Kim Jong-un in a poisoning attack, a decapitation strike. So the accusations are flying back and forth, and I'm not saying that the CIA does not carry out assassination attempts. They have, it's a big part of their history, and poison is one of them. They tried to get to Fidel Castro that way, but in this case, I have to say North Korea is definitely stepping over the line into a little bit of paranoia. Which, again, doesn't mean that the CIA doesn't want to try and kill him. But it's just more accusations here. Now, speaking of accusations that are really out there, Fox News, which is now shifting hard over to the left and the war agenda, is now quoting the Pentagon as saying there may be a connection between Iran and North Korea. And basically what they're saying is that North Korea is influencing the Islamic Republic, saying that Iran attempted to launch a cruise missile from a midget submarine earlier this week, which the Pentagon says is based on a Pyongyang design, the same type that sank a South Korean warship in 2010. And so apparently the thinking is it's a metal tube, it's round on the front, it's got a propeller on the back, and a little sail thing in the middle. Oh, that's definitely got to be a direct influence there. And, of course, we know that story about North Korea sinking the South Korea warship in 2010 was another war-starting hoax. The blueprint for the torpedo North Korea was using did not mechanically match the remains of the torpedo brought up from underneath where the Chosun sank. So they're still out there. If at first you don't succeed, lie again. It's all they know how to do. The House of Representatives is voting to impose new sanctions on North Korea, acting the role of picador. They voted 419-1 to target North Korea's shipping industry and people who employ North Korean slave labor abroad, because, as you know, the United States has a huge slave labor industry now in those prisons, and boy, oh boy, you better not cut into our action on that one here. And the bill is also demanding that the Trump administration report to Congress within 90 days on whether North Korea should be reinstated under the government's state sponsors of terror list. Doesn't mean North Korea has to actually be caught sponsoring state terror. Just put them on the list, and that's more sanctions and more punishment. We're going to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, the House of Representatives passed another bill establishing control over the Russian Far East ports. Basically, the U.S. has now said they are going to stop and inspect ships in the Western Pacific in international waters to make sure that everybody is obeying the U.S. sanctions against North Korea. Russia is rightfully standing up and saying this is a violation of international law. The only ports and the only ships the United States has authority to stop and inspect are American ports and flags, ships that are flying the flag of the United States. And they're basically saying, in effect, the U.S. is declaring a naval blockade on the Western Pacific, and that actually counts as an act of war. And again, remember, who's doing all the aggressive actions here? It's the United States. Now, getting on into Syria, as you know, Russia, Iran, and Turkey came up with a deal to establish safe zones inside Syria to try and slow all of this nonsense down. And Ron Paul is out there saying maybe the killing will stop. That would be really kind of nice. But Russia just upped the ante by saying that these Syria safe zones will be closed to U.S. coalition jets. In other words, the established safe zones, the U.S. is being told, stay out. You are not allowed in there. And, of course, the U.S. is not going to go along with that. The U.S. government thinks they have the right to bomb anybody anywhere because we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. And, you know, all of these other countries, they have evil intention, and we just have to bomb them until they love us again. But Russia does have, and for that matter, so does Syria, a legitimate reason to ask the coalition jets to stay outside certain boundaries. First of all, the coalition is not welcome in Syria by the Syrian government. They don't have Syria's permission to be anywhere in Syria at all. And the Pentagon has finally officially acknowledged that, yes, they blew up a mosque in Syria's Aleppo province full of worshiping Muslims. The U.S. had insisted it was a terrorist meeting and claimed the mosque was intact after the airstrike, despite video evidence. In other words, they dropped a magic bomb that just passed right through the walls of the mosque, killed everybody inside, but didn't disturb the architecture. Actually, the only weapon that does that is a neutron enhancement weapon. But the mosque actually was destroyed. And the U.S. government has a terrible, terrible record of claiming to be bombing ISIS and Al-Qaeda and blowing up important Syria infrastructure. So Russia has a legitimate reason for asking the United States to stay out of the safe zones, which I don't think the U.S. is going to do. And apparently they're saying the safe zones will probably be in place by May 22nd, unless something else happens, which unfortunately does seem to be in the wind. Once again, they're going to send a new international probe into Idlib, to confirm that it was Bashar al-Assad who used sarin gas on his own citizens, and stop asking us why he would do such a stupid thing. Assad is a stupid man. Only Western governments and only President Trump are smart and intelligible and make sense, and all these countries we're attacking are led by people who are totally insane, crazy, and they just do things like this just for the heck of it. That's the new counter propaganda coming on that one. But again, experts that are not politically compromised have come on out and said the evidence that sarin was used there is thin to the point of transparency, and that's backed up by the videos coming out of Idlib showing these supposed first responders handling the victims without any protective gear other than a face mask. And if you know anything about sarin gas, somebody who's been killed with sarin gas, they are still very, very toxic. If you touch them with your bare hands, you are going to die. And we're seeing the media crank up on Syria. Assad is bad, we are good, Russia's bad, so forth and so on. Over at Pace Magazine, they're saying, let's just call Western media coverage of Syria by its real name. It is propaganda. And basically, this guy makes a very interesting comment in here, and it almost ties into what Colbert said about Trump the other day. Basically saying they're making up all these lies, and they're lobbing cruise missiles and sending armadas and dropping Moabs. And this is a direct quote from this article. All of it to quell suspicions that the president's undersized hands might reflect a certain priapic compactness, which is a very polite way of putting it. And I would hate to think that that was the reason Trump decided to go along with the war agenda, but people at the top of empires, there are no restrictions on them. Look at how wacko Caligula got. Now, more concerns are being expressed about the white helmets being a propaganda arm of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And there's an article out of 21st Century Wire where Vanessa Beeley is basically interviewed by Rhymes Media Group and saying the white helmets are part of the terror group, and they are part of the propaganda mechanism. And we've been hearing from people on the ground in Syria that the white helmets are going through the motions that normally accompany one of these false flag gas attacks. And it looks like this next one's going to be really, really big, because we had that report about how Al Jazeera was actually hired to go on in and film this attack simulation. And they've got huge numbers of people. They've got like 30 ambulances and fire trucks. It's going to be a huge set for this. And here's where the story gets a little bit weird. Over at the Free Thought Project, they're reporting on a very unpleasant incident at a hospital in Idlib. Somebody broke into the morgue and stole 23 bodies of dead children. I think it's the set decoration department. They're still being embarrassed by that video from the last Idlib hoax where they pan the camera over the dead children and then the camera moves back momentarily and you can see one of the kids opening her eyes to see if the camera's gone by. Well, they're not going to take that chance again. We need real dead kids this time. And so these children, their bodies were stolen from the refrigerators at the hospital morgue. And unless the white helmets have their own refrigerated storage, it signals that the false flag is going to have to be staged really quick before the bodies decay to the point where nobody is going to believe it's a recent death. But they're going to do it again. They're going to do another false flag, and the U.S. is just going to go on in. Because that's how the U.S. has been operating since the end of World War II. Fantastic lie about an enemy government followed by invasion, overthrow, regime change. That's their methodology. And apparently it doesn't bother them that the entire world now understands that's what the U.S. government has been doing. So, the U.S. is delivering more military aid to Lebanon. Earlier today, they delivered over 1,000 machine guns to Lebanese security forces in order to fortify security along Lebanon's border. Well, Lebanon borders a lot of different countries, but I think they're talking about the Syrian border. And we've been hearing, of course, that the U.S. was sending arms and forces into Jordan on the Jordanian border. So there appears to be a concern that if there was a major military operation in Syria, that Syria might try and move south, possibly go after Israel. So they're already moving to contain Syria. There's an invasion coming. There's no question in my mind. They're going to stage a horrific false flag attack, and they're going to follow it up with just a full-on invasion and say, there, took us 6 years, but we got Assad out and we got our puppet in. Apparently, the U.S. is advancing the sale of warheads and precision-guided missiles to Saudi Arabia as part of the additional military and intelligence assistance to Saudi Arabia's intervention in Yemen on behalf of the United States. War, war, and more war. Now, here's a very sad story, and it's from Middle East Monitor, which tends to be a pretty straight shooter. During last summer, when Israel was pounding the Gaza Strip, as they do on a regular basis, there was a big deal made over this photograph where an Israeli soldier gave some water to a 74-year-old Palestinian woman, Gayla Abu Rida, and she drank the water, and they took pictures, and they put the pictures out, demonstrating how wonderful the Israeli army is to the civilians, the humanity of the Israeli armies. Well, apparently witnesses have now come forward to say that once the cameras were turned off, this same soldier stood back and shot this woman right in the head from 1 meter away. So, now, getting on back to this situation with Obama using the NSA to spy on Donald Trump, his campaign people, his family, his friends, and everything, was all based, supposedly it was legal because they had a FISA warrant, which was obtained using that discredited dossier of Donald Trump and the prostitutes in the hotel in Moscow. And the FISA court gave him the warrant, and the official story is that the NSA picked up all these other discussions of all Trump's associates, just incidental to investigating Donald Trump's links to Russia, which even Nancy Pelosi has now admitted there isn't any evidence of any such collusion. And then the Obama administration took all this intelligence and distributed it without masking out the names of the incidental contacts as required by law. So basically, there's now a request from the news media asking Donald Trump to declassify Obama's unmasking requests. In other words, who was he specifically looking at? And Circa has formally requested the Trump administration declassify the records. It will be interesting to see whether they get it. Now, the NSA is allowed under Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act to spy on foreign powers without a court warrant. U.S. law strictly prohibits the targeting of American citizens for such surveillance. That whole Fourth Amendment thing is just such an annoyance. So it was all supposedly done by accident. We only accidentally overheard these U.S. citizens without a warrant. Circa is now going in and saying, we need to see what the actual operational instructions were to see if there was intent. Now, another story coming out here from thelastgreatstand.com. The Guardian came on out with an article that was once again trying to demonize Trump with this Russian collusion thing, but inadvertently admitted something we'd all suspected. Because the Guardian admits the European spy agencies captured this information on Donald Trump and passed it on to CIA Director John Brennan, who then used it to orchestrate a full-on political espionage campaign against Donald Trump. See how it's all working now? All right, we're coming up now on a commercial break, and we'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Rand Paul's now out there saying that he has reason to believe the Obama administration may have spied on his campaign. At this point, I think it would be easier for us to count up the number of people the Obama administration was not spying on, because that's going to be a much, much shorter list. The problem is, once the intelligence agencies are allowed to build the capability to spy on everybody, The political leadership is going to use it. And as we have seen recently, they'll skirt the laws. They'll ignore the laws, or they'll craft a legal fiction based on a fraud to say, we have to do this. We have to spy on all these people. Now, Huma Abedin is back in the news, and I'm starting to wonder if Hillary is actually planning to throw Huma under the wagon and offer Huma up as a sacrificial piece of meat in order to save Hillary's own sorry rear end. But Director Comey is still out there trying to protect her. And they made a big deal of the fact that Huma Abedin actually went for a walk outside New York, and the cameras were following her along. I even saw that on Fox News. But basically, one of the things Comey admitted to when he was testifying before the Senate committee was that Huma Abedin was regularly forwarding these classified documents to Anthony Weiner's laptop. And apparently the story that they shared the laptop, that's no longer operative. Apparently she did have her own machine. This was Anthony's laptop. And she's out there saying, well, I just sent them over there to print. And Comey said that they chose not to prosecute her because investigators could find no evidence of malintent. Now, FBI Director Comey is obviously ignorant of Title 18 U.S. Code Section 793, Paragraph F, which clearly states intent is not required. Title 18 does not punish what you want to do. It punishes what you do, exposing classified information on unsecured media, which the instant it passed outside of the secure computer facility onto Anthony's laptop, which is unsecured, the violation had been committed. And the reason for it is irrelevant. Now, we know, going on back and looking at the email server scandal, there was information found on that server that was special access compartmentalized that is normally kept on air-gapped private government computer networks that are not connected with the outside internet. The only way that information could get from that secured network to the email server is somebody had to walk it out of the secured network on a flash drive. And that definitely shows intent on that point. But again, we don't need it. Now, an interesting story coming out of 12160.info is revealing one of the reasons Comey may be working to protect Huma Abedin and, by extension, Hillary Clinton. Because apparently a review of Comey's professional history shows that he's deeply entrenched in that big money corruption of Washington, D.C. And he had a lot of professional relationships that were all undisclosed to the public when he announced the Bureau would not prosecute Clinton. And this concern focuses on millions of dollars that Comey accepted from a Clinton Foundation defense contractor, Comey's former membership on a Clinton Foundation corporate partners board, and a surprising financial relationship with his brother Peter Comey, who works at the law firm that does the Clinton Foundation's taxes. So there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there. And there is, remember, that little aspect that back when HSBC was caught laundering money for drug smugglers, read CIA, Comey was on the board of directors and had to have known what was going on. All of this, the Clintons, Comey, all of it, centers around that CIA drug smuggling enterprise going all the way back to Arkansas in the mid-1980s. We got to take another break for commercials, got a caller waiting on the line, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go to the phones here. Lou in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike?
Yes, you're on the air.
Oh, actually, California.
Oh, I'm sorry. My mistake.
Guten Morgen. Wie geht's Ihnen?
Gut, Naka.
Hey, Mike, I was wanting to ask you, do you know a way I can find out who my congressman is over in my district? Because I still have no idea who won the election in my district in November.
Well, basically, you can go to congress.org and type in your zip code, and that will be able to fix it for you.
Yeah, because I don't know, when you feel like calling, I don't know if you could do this. You call your congressman, whoever it is, or your senator, and tell them how you feel about a certain issue that they're going to be voting on, you know, and tell them, I'd like for you to, vote yes or no on this and stuff, because like I say, I don't know who my congressman is over there in this district, so I don't know how much value do you put, like, for example, this thing going on in Syria and North Korea, about, hey, I know I understand that they already voted for the sanctions on North Korea. But,
yeah. Unfortunately, now that the elections are over and they're getting their money from the special interests, and the elections are basically rigged anyway, I'm afraid our representative government does not represent the American people anymore. And a lot of people have come to the conclusion that complaining to their members of Congress is basically a waste of time and effort, with few exceptions. I mean, obviously, Tulsi Gabbard, again, I don't agree with everything she says, but she seems to be speaking her own mind a lot more, and that certainly is a very rare quality in Washington, D.C. We certainly thought we were getting a president who was going to follow his own mind and his own lead, but we certainly did not.
No, and they've been compromised, and it's just that I see these things going on, and like I called you some time ago, and we just gotta do something, instead of just sit around and listen to all these things that are happening and everything,
Well, it's this strange political reality. Again, I really do not want to see a violent revolution or civil war in this country. But again, back to John F. Kennedy, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. I'm remembering there was that book, 100 Things to Do Waiting for the Revolution, and there was a quote in there by, I think the author's name was Claire Wolfe, who said, we're at that awkward period in history. It's too late to work within the system and too soon to shoot the bastards. And then she came on out later, I think it was just a few years ago, and said, no, it's time to start shooting the bastards.
Yeah, because I don't know how close we are for that to be happening,
Well, I don't want to see it happen. I hate to be a stickler on that, and I'm drawing a lot of heat in the email and everything, saying, what is wrong with you? It is the time, and I really can't go along with that. I think the Gandhi approach to it, finding a way to de-link, pull away your support. Certainly, we have the freedom to shout to the rest of the world that we, the American people, are not on board with all this insanity coming out of Washington, D.C. And just hope, work toward a Soviet Union-style collapse of our central government.
Yeah, because it's a disaster that's coming if we let it happen that way. And like I told you the other day when I called you, I've been praying that things don't get that far. That's why I'm trying to see how I can do something.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little difference can be made here, or maybe we can bring this march toward this next war to a halt and everything. And I speak as a veteran. I'll tell you that, an Army veteran.
Well, I mean, that was certainly the hope of all of us who were trying or supporting Donald Trump, is that if we could prevent Hillary Clinton from getting into the White House, that we would break this cycle of endless war. And unfortunately, we're all sharing our disappointments on that one.
Yeah, and I tell you, I don't regret not having voted for Hillary. There were other candidates out there, of course.
Well, again, if they hadn't stolen the nomination from Bernie Sanders, I probably would have supported him rather than Donald Trump. But in the end, it came on down to, do you want Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump? And I most assuredly did not want Hillary Clinton. And so that's where we went.
And this is where we are at today.
Yeah. Nothing has really changed.
But maybe there's hope out there somewhere. Like, all right.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Avita Zane, man. Take care.
All right. Avita Zane, we're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, how you doing, Mike?
I'm doing good.
Good. Two things. One, you actually think Russia's going to just step out of the way and let the United States invade Syria? You think?
No, I don't. Russia, and for that matter, China, and for that matter, all the other nations that are not currently under U.S. domination, they see what's happening, and they're realizing that appeasement of the United States is not going to work any better than when Neville Chamberlain was kissing up to the Nazis. It didn't work. And so at some point there's going to be a line where they say, all right, this is it. If you push any further, we're going to be having to go to war because the alternative is we're all going to get conquered and brought into this new world order, which is actually kind of a lousy idea.
Yeah, the other thing is I want to tell you and your audience, you want to see a really awesome movie, see The Promise. I mean, it was really heavy, and the reason I mentioned this in conjunction with Syria, because a lot of the same cast of characters are involved in this, including, of course, the Turks, who wanted to actually, who attempted to actually wipe the Armenians from the face of the earth.
Yeah, but don't you dare call it a Holocaust, because then Israel will sue you for trademark violation.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing, too, is what you've got today is so strange. I know you're an atheist yourself. I'm not. I believe in God, but I'm not a religious, not in any organized way. It's that I think there is a God and there is an evil in this world, too.
Mm-hmm.
When you really look at what's going on in Syria, where you see the Turks trying to establish again the Ottoman Empire, the Saudis, the United States, and the Israelis, all, actually allied to try to get rid of a good man in Bashar Assad, lining up against another good man in Vladimir Putin. To me, the best statesman probably since Churchill. And
I have to be very honest. I hold Putin higher in esteem than I do Winston Churchill. If you dig in a little bit, I mean, look at some of the stuff Churchill did earlier on, like in the Boer Wars and everything. Again, I understand people at the top of a country have to make some very, very difficult decisions. But in this case, motive does come into it. And what we're seeing, certainly from the U.S.-centric Western world, it is embarked on a mission of global conquest. And I think, not to make excuses for Donald Trump, but I think when he got into the Oval Office, all of the top economists and military came on in and said, here's the reality. If you stop this war plan, the United States will collapse. Because right now we don't have enough manufacturing, and nobody wants our GMO agriculture. If we do not go out and conquer other people's wealth to keep the private central bankers happy, then we're going to implode and go away.
But people should understand, too, with Syria, that same Christians, I don't know if they're actually Armenians or not, but they're also a member of the Eastern Orthodox Church for the most part, will be massacred if this evil has its way. And it's Assad who's not only protecting them, he's protecting everybody in Syria. He's trying desperately to keep these hordes from doing what the Turks did to their own people, back in World War I. And I just don't understand. I know you say it's the economy, they want to have a war for the economy. I don't know if these idiots don't understand. First of all, a nuclear war would probably be the end of even what's his name, Paul Craig Roberts said, that'd probably be the end of the world.
Yes.
But let's say it just becomes a localized war, and we get bogged down. First of all, I think the Russians will kick our butts, okay, because they're motivated. But on top of that, once we get bogged down in some kind of war there, I think you're going to see the troops. Not only you're going to start seeing our own troops start to mutiny, you're going to see people back in the United States. You take the Malidians and the what do you call them again? The Generation Z.
Yeah.
They're not going to want to go into this either. They're going to start rioting, refusing to go, refusing to get drafted. 18-year-olds can vote too now, and that's not going to. I don't know what they think you're doing. You're going to have it's a whole.
They're caught up in groupthink
because the economy's still.
They're caught up in the groupthink. Basically, it's all these people in power, and regardless of what they think personally, the groupthink is they're all going to go along with saying the same thing that the boss is saying or the bosses are saying, and the people trapped by groupthink can talk themselves into all kinds of nonsense, like witch burnings and use of torture and so forth. And that was one of the reasons I think people had some optimism for Trump, because he seemed to be an independent mind, going into a swamp where everybody's brain is glued to everybody else's brain. But again, we have a military that is judging their effectiveness in war not on the basis of the weapon's actual performance, because in many cases they haven't yet been tried in combat, but on the sales brochures from the defense contractors. And we're hearing about all these disappointments. And you're right, our armed forces are not motivated. The American people are tired of war. And again, going back to Sun Tzu and the Art of War, the United States government does not have the essential keys for an ultimate victory. And but again, from their point of view, they're stuck with it. They must move forward. If they turn around and go back, they're all going to lose their job, and they don't want that to happen. So they're going to keep on moving forward. And I imagine when the United States does lose the war, they're all going to look really, really surprised and say, what the heck happened? But you need to realize when two countries go to war, both of them go in there with the expectation they're going to be victorious, and obviously half the time they're going to be wrong.
But, look at these neocons. The top neocons were draft dodgers. Very few of them went into the military. Most of them were draft dodgers one way or the other during the Vietnam War.
Yes.
They saw all what happened there. They themselves probably refused. They did refuse to go. They found different ways to get out. All right?
Yes.
They saw at the time the country was almost ripped apart right then. We almost went into a revolution back then. Don't they understand? Don't they understand themselves what they're triggering, including their own deaths? Because people will go into these White Houses, not only White House, they'll go to Washington D.C. these lobbyists, these think tanks, and they'll pull these people out of their plush offices. And they'll hang them up by the nearest lamppost. People are angry.
Yes.
Sick and tired of this. I don't want to see violence either. That's what's coming. If they do this.
I accept that.
Don't they?
Okay, I accept that. I accept that. I don't want to see it, but I accept it's probably going to happen.
So don't they understand that for their own safety?
No. They're sitting in their little meeting rooms and they're saying, "Oh, this is all working. Yeah, the media's got the American people under control. This is all working. We're going to be victorious. Yeah, it's going to be okay, right? I'll believe it if you believe it. Oh yeah, I believe it too." And that's what groupthink. That's how groupthink works.
I mean, all they got to do is, the French Revolution was like that. That's what happened. People are disgusted, and I see that happening in France again. If they don't do the right thing and elect Madame Le Pen, this clown Macron, whatever his name is, within about 2 years, the French will be ready to start the guillotines up again.
No,
I don't understand these people for their own safety. They don't understand this.
History has shown that rulers get caught up in their own glory and their own overconfidence until finally they make that one misstep that turns the entire public against them, whether that was Louis XVI or Ceausescu or Mussolini or any of those dead Celtic kings who keep bobbing up in the peat bogs over in Great Britain. It does happen. Charles I, another good example on that. Rulers do make mistakes, and very often it triggers a revolution. It could happen here. I don't want to see it happen here, but I accept that it's a distinct possibility.
I don't, but it could very well happen, not only here, but in Europe as a whole.
Well, I've been saying all along that this push to build a global government has created a political climate that could lead to a global revolution, where it's not just France, not just the United States, but all of a sudden in all of these countries, everybody stands up and says, okay, it's time to kick out these private central bankers and all these politicians who would sell us into their slavery, and it could get really ugly. But maybe a global revolution would not be entirely a bad thing.
You know, I think these people in Europe right now, they should start to re-examine themselves because they don't want this invasion that's coming anyway. They should start to look at themselves and say, you know what? It's time we get out of the EU and start aligning ourselves with Russia. They're basically mostly Slavs. They have more in common than they do with Western Europe.
But every country that starts to move toward Russia gets attacked. That's what happened in Ukraine. It may happen in what was that other country that's now buying their arms from Russia? It's not that they want to stay with the West. They're afraid of the consequences of trying to break free from the new empire. But at some point, the myth of the empire's invincibility will be shattered, and that will be the beginning of the end. That's what happened to Rome. When they lost those 3 legions up in Germany, the myth of Roman invincibility was shattered, and provinces started breaking away on the outer edge. They couldn't keep paying their debt and supporting the bread and circuses without those tax revenues from the outlying frontier, and Rome fell.
Wasn't that the Huns that actually started to bring them down?
Well, the Huns actually invaded Rome itself, but it was up in Germania where they lost the 3 legions, and that started the process. Mark, I got to let you go. We've got a couple of other callers who've been waiting very, very, very patiently, and we're going to get to them after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to take 2 more phone calls. Then we're going to close the lines because I got a lot of news to go through before the lovely Lady Claire joins us in a little over an hour. So, Charlie in North Carolina, what is on your mind?
Yeah, what's up with the 30-hour work week on Obamacare? You heard anything? I mean, I've heard everything but that.
I have heard nothing about it one way or the other, and certainly what we're getting now is the 40-hour work week is a thing of the past, and we should all get used to 50- and 60-hour work weeks. The philosophy seems to be work them until they drop. We don't want to pay pensions. We don't want to pay Social Security. Just use them up. There are always more workers.
Yeah, well, see, with the 30-hour work week, you know, you can't pay the Obamacare premiums.
No, you can't.
So I think this is a Wall Street shuffle. I don't know if this will go through or not, but believe me, if this changes, it'll be worse off for everybody except for people that got the medical device tax lifted and whatever. But the 30-hour work week is, you know, that's the real bad thing about the whole thing. You know, that's the job-killing part of Obamacare.
Okay, now I'm unclear where you're getting the 30-hour work week. Is that imposed by your employer, or is that something that...
No, it's if you have anybody works over 30 hours, the employer has to give you health insurance. So the employer, they do not. So they have twice as many to 3 times as many people on a work schedule, and that's needed. So if you want to get a full-time job, lots of luck unless you're a professional. You know, so if you're working for a living, in a lot of places, you're only going to get 28 hours a week. Because if you work over 30 hours, they have to, as an average, they have to give you they have to offer you health, or give you health insurance or offer it to you.
I thought they pulled it back to 20 hours.
28 hours, they don't have to offer it.
I thought they pulled it back to 20 hours because of all the companies that were having people work for 20 hours.
When they say, you look at an application and it says full-time 30 hours or more, that's what that is. But a 30-hour work week just keeps everybody broke. So anyway, that's just one if you know anything about it.
No, well, I mean, other than I agree with you, it's just another way of making the people pay for the politics of Obamacare. And I'm not expecting to see its replacement really be all that good for ordinary people. If they wanted to really have affordable health care, take off all this government-mandated stuff and let the health insurance companies and the medical providers compete for the business of the American people. That'll drive down prices and bring quality and service back on up. But every time the government steps on in, prices go up, quality goes down. We saw that with auto insurance and so forth. Charlie, I'm going to have to let you go. I got one more call before the top of the hours. Kevin in Washington State, aloha, what is on your mind?
Greetings from Puget Sound, Michael.
It's a lovely part of the country. I remember when Claire and I lived in that area.
I have a lighthearted question on a Friday to ask you.
Okay.
Mid-70s, Were you on the Gong Show with the Magic Act featuring your pet chicken?
Yes.
That didn't quite make it out of the container?
Yes, that was me. That was me.
Okay, I saw a Gong Show. You're on the highlight reel. I would suggest cropping that out and putting it on your website because it shows your dry sense of humor.
Okay.
It was hilarious.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I didn't know I was on the highlights reel, but we'll be back.
Oh, yeah, you're on the highlight reel, and so I saw that. I said, that has to be him. So I thought, thanks for indulging the question, and you have a good weekend, okay?
Right. Same to you. We'll be back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. And as long as we're walking down memory lane to my ancient history, this goes back to when I was talking about the lost legions of Rome, where they lost 3 legions up in Germania, and that began the disintegration of Rome because the myth of Roman invincibility was destroyed. And many, many years ago, I was in Germany working on a film project. And the main command sites are all archaeological reserves and protected. But the actual battlefields are just spread all over the place, very often onto private land. And one of the animators I was working with, one weekend we took off, we went out to visit his family. And these things, I'm showing this on BAM User. The RBN listeners are just going to have to take my word for it. These were literally all over the place. Every time they tried to dig for post holes or anything, they would dig these up. And what this is a bronze sword trap from the tunic of a Roman soldier. They did not all have those solid metal armor breastplates. Those were the officers. The lower soldiers would have these thick leather tunics that had these little sword traps sewn all over them. And the idea was that you'd get a little bit of a cut when the sword hit you, but this would prevent the sword from going in too deep. So that's a souvenir from the beginning of the fall of Rome, a reminder that no empire lasts forever. We're going to close the phone lines for a little bit because I want to get into some of the news that's going on here. Everybody is still screaming about the emergency spending bill, where it went, and basically, a lot of people are saying this emergency spending bill underscores the fact that Donald Trump is not able to implement his promises. There's no money for the border wall, but plenty for Planned Parenthood in a Republican-dominated Congress. This emergency budget actually has a provision that blocks the border wall. And it failed to cut the funding for EPA, which Trump had promised they were going to do. It provides funding for Planned Parenthood. It provides funding for the sanctuary cities and Obamacare subsidies. So the election made no difference. The agenda continues to be the agenda, continues to be the agenda. Now, as a result of the funding of Planned Parenthood, there's a very quiet, soft protest that's going on. Over at Paul Ryan's office, they have received 200,000 baby socks, each representing an unborn baby aborted at the hands of Planned Parenthood. Now, the Koch brothers, I never get that straight. They're already pledging to build a campaign war chest to defend Republicans who vote against the GOP health bill. They want to keep things just the way they are, obviously heavily invested in those health insurance industries, and they're making money hand over fist, or at least for their investors. They claim they're not making the money they want to be making. But the big money politics has really reached a stage where it's very obvious. Our nation is controlled by money and people with money. And sometimes there aren't even really all that many people involved with it because so much of the nation's economic decisions are now being made by computers. And it's spiraling out of control. And everybody is out there whining about President Trump and, oh, how terrible he is. Celebrity Chrissy Teigen blamed Donald Trump for the crippling anxiety she's experiencing and said she's going to have to go on another med. Say, that's not a joke. I'm having to take more medication because of Donald Trump. Lawrence Fishburne's daughter is blaming the political situation on Donald Trump for her having received a DUI citation. The trauma caused by the Trump victory made me drink and then drive. Apparently that's it. Now, on a more serious note, getting away from the liberal snowflakes, we are seeing some legitimate criticism of the first 100 days. Over at QZ.com, they're pointing out Trump ran as a foreign policy realist, meaning he should know we can't win these wars and we don't really have any business being over there. And instead, he's become another interventionist. And they start off saying, wow, that was fast. 3 months, Trump goes from voicing much-needed skepticism of foreign policy to just embracing what was handed to him. The orthodoxy of endless interventions around the world. And everybody's ganging up on Donald Trump. The Anti-Defamation League is now saying that Donald Trump is to blame for anti-Semitism. Ooh, he's an anti-Semite. I'm not even sure what they're basing that on. He's been going along with Israel's agenda like every president before him. Or maybe he's not smiling while he does it, the way Hillary would. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates just rejoining our network. Scott Adams has weighed on in with an observation. The Trump resistance has abandoned this Russian puppet idea because there's no evidence to support it. And it's embarrassing them to pursue it. And they're moving over to this new idea, Donald Trump is crazy. And unfortunately, they may actually get a little more traction with that because crazy is a subjective opinion. There is no scientific machine that you can wire somebody up to and there'll be a needle that will say mildly neurotic, sociopathic, megalomania, obsessive compulsive. It's no such thing. Mental illness is the opinion of somebody who supposedly is trained to spot mental illnesses and sell you psychiatric medication. So we're seeing all these Trump is crazy, he's infirm, coming on out. And here's the real shocker. This is coming from the New Yorker magazine. And it's reporting that members of Congress are holding secret conversations, it's not that secret if the New Yorker found out, about removing President Donald Trump under the 25th Amendment. And under Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, a president can be removed from office if he is judged to be unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office by the vice president, who wants his job, and a majority of the cabinet secretaries, or by a congressionally appointed body such as a panel of medical experts. If the president objects, Congress is given 3 weeks to have a vote on removing the president, and a 2/3 majority in each chamber is required to remove the president. So we're going to start seeing more questions about how's his health. I mean, remember when we were asking about Hillary Clinton's obvious signs of frailty, and it's unfair, you're being misogynist. And now we have Donald Trump, who basically impressed everybody during the campaign season with his boundless energy. He was just bouncing all over the place. And now they're going to say, oh, yeah, he's hiding secrets about his health. He's really ill. We've got to get him on out. And boy, talk about ingratitude. Donald Trump has basically betrayed his support base, given the deep state everything they want, and they're still talking about getting rid of him. So we would then get Mike Pence, who will go along with the agenda of more wars on the world and more poverty for the American people, but he'll smile while he does it, and I guess that makes all the difference in the world. Now, I want to talk about this little Stephen Colbert kerfuffle. I hadn't been paying that much attention to it because, frankly, I stopped watching Stephen Colbert a while ago. But apparently Colbert went on a rant on his show, and I went back and I saw it, and I understand it's supposed to be a humor show and satire and freedom of speech and everything, but this crossed the line. I mean, as much as I am disappointed by Donald Trump, I would never make it personal. I don't make jokes about his hair. I'm not going to make comments about his family members. At least within the universe of what really happened, that's definitely off limits. So basically, Colbert just slammed Donald Trump and ended up with what some people are saying is a homophobic comment. That the only thing Trump's mouth is good for is being Vladimir Putin's, and I'll let you fill in the rest of the blank because I don't want to risk the FCC license of our on-air affiliates. The reason this is becoming an issue is over in Texas, there's a lawyer, Cameron Kinvig, who has basically said that Colbert's comments may be illegal because they're knowingly false and clearly show signs of actual malice. Now, in the corporate media, when they make a mistake, when they smear somebody, when they damage them, there is a defense called absence of malice. If we didn't mean to do you harm, then we are safe from lawsuit. But I agree with this lawyer, this clearly was a malicious attack on the president. Now, before we get too down on Stephen Colbert, we need to remember he is reading material written for him by the show's writers under the direction of the show's producers and executive producer, and I don't know if Stephen Colbert is one of the EPs or not, but we need to find out, because Colbert may not himself have originated the material. It could have even come on down from above the show itself, from the network. Networks regularly intrude onto the production of a show and say, you will do this, you will not do that. Little bit of a anecdote from the early days of the original Gene Roddenberry Star Trek. When NBC was negotiating to bring the series in, they had two objections. First of all, Gene Roddenberry did not have anybody on the Enterprise smoking cigarettes. He figured by the 23rd century, everybody would have quit that. And he had a female second in command. And NBC said, well, our advertisers are not going to advertise on your show unless your cast is puffing away while they're fighting the Klingons. And the men in the audience are going to object to that strong female. So if you want the show to go on the air, you'd better make some choices. And so eventually Roddenberry agreed to have a male, albeit an alien, second in command, Mr. Spock. But he was able to hang on to this idea that nobody on the Enterprise was smoking. They certainly drank a lot, especially Scotty. But those are the kind of deals that you have to make with the network to get your show produced. All right, now then, let's talk about the economy. And we're seeing over at Investment Watch blog another article reminding us all that more and more countries around the world are now bypassing the United States dollar, and that is really the heart of the current U.S. militarism. Because at the end of World War II, under the Bretton Woods Agreement, the U.S. dollar was the global trade and banking currency. When countries did business with other countries, they would first go through the U.S. dollar. They would convert their krona into U.S. dollars, then they would take those U.S. dollars over to this other country, which would then convert the U.S. dollars into whatever their domestic currency was. And the United States financial system made a handsome profit off of this. And it was a way for the U.S. to keep hegemonic global domination over the world's economic system as a means of control. Well, the rest of the world has gotten tired of that. And you have countries that have treaties for direct currency exchange. They don't go through the dollar. And it was inevitable anyway, because in the years right after World War II, when accounts were still being settled, if not with actual bullion, but with boxes of printed notes, having a single reliable global currency did make sense. Before the U.S. dollar, it had been the British pound sterling. But in this day and age of instantaneous global financial transactions and confirmation, the idea of a single global currency is obsolete, especially when you're having to surrender part of your profits of cross-border trade and banking to the owner of that paper and ink. So countries are turning away from it. That's what's behind BRICS. And you're seeing China has direct currency treaties with 8 other nations, and it's a growing movement. And that is why the U.S. government is in a real panic. because right now, having that dollar out there, forcing other people to use it for cross-border trade and banking, to purchase natural resources, that's about the only thing keeping our economy from an immediate collapse. That's why they're willing to go to war on Iraq when Iraq wanted to sell their oil for the euro. That's why they went to war on Libya when Libya wanted to sell their oil for the gold dinar. That's what's driving this new U.S.-led World War III, forcing everybody back to being dependent on the U.S. paper dollar. Article coming out of here, again, Investment Watch blog. Canada's banking system may be starting to crash right before our eyes. They're talking about the Home Capital Group, which has now been given a junk rating, and its stock, its value, is now down more than 78% since the first of this year. And analysts are saying there's nothing stopping it from going further, dropping further, and we're starting to see contagion. Now, where this all began was with securities regulators accusing the company of misleading their investors, which is something you really don't want to do, but if you do, you don't want them to find out. And that's what triggered the run on Home Capital. They pulled out $472 million just last Wednesday. And it's not going to stop. The panic is definitely on, and it may be spreading to some of these other Canadian institutions. Now, we've been talking about Puerto Rico's bankruptcy. And as part of the bankruptcy, they are now going to close 184 public schools. I don't know how many public schools they have in Puerto Rico. It is a small island. That may actually be most of them. Be an opportunity for homeschooling to catch on down. And all of this is because of the fundamental flaw in private central banks, in that they create more debt than money with which to pay the debt until the debt strangles the country and its people. Now, American-based clothing chain Express is planning to close all 17 of their stores in Canada and just get out of Canada. Apparently, it's not doing very well up there. Apparently, Marsh Supermarkets have announced they're starting to close stores. 9 more in Indiana will be closing for good at the end of this month. That makes 18 stores closing this month. 6 of those stores are in Indianapolis, including 2 that were announced Thursday on Kentucky Avenue and 86th Street. And the latest flurry of closings comes only a few weeks after the company announced more store closings. People do not have money to go to the stores. Guess what happens? Over in London, they're observing that the traditional London pub is going out of business at an unprecedented rate. And it's not that they don't have customers, because if you've never been to a London pub, you need to understand it's not just a bar where you buy drinks. It's sort of a communal meeting room where all of your neighbors get together and discuss what's going on. That's part of the pub experience. But as land prices, rent prices, retail space prices go on up, they're not able to make it anymore. And some very historic, iconic London pubs are being forced to shut down. The Public House, yes, that's what was called, the Public House. New study out showing the growing significance of cryptocurrencies. It is a coming thing, and I probably need to study a little bit more about how they operate. I was starting to, but unfortunately the particular cryptocurrency I was trying to turn into a learning experience was banned here in Hawaii. I'm concerned about a virtual currency because that's what so much of what is issued by the private central banks happens to be. The difference is that a cryptocurrency has no centralized issuing authority. But whether it can still be manipulated, well, I look at what's going on in Japan, and that looks to me like it's a bubble. I'd still prefer to go on back to coinage in your pocket made out of metals with intrinsic value. We'll be back after these few words. And And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we are seeing a continuation of the corporate media trying to tell us that everything is all hunky-dory, and they're claiming an unemployment rate of only 4.4%. Huzzah, huzzah, the good times are here. Now, if we're at a 4.4% unemployment rate, then why is the Baltic Dry Index at record lows? The Baltic Dry Index is an indicator of raw goods ordered by manufacturing to produce products supposedly being purchased by all these people with these jobs. You can't have a declining Baltic Dry Index at the same time you claim to have job growth. This is just another Pinocchio lie, because we know there are over 90 million Americans, legal American citizens, who are out of work and have not been able to find work for a long time. But they're just tossed into another category because the government doesn't want to come on out and admit what the real unemployment number is, because you might actually get upset with the economic masters of this country, and that can't be allowed to happen. Because if it does, like that other caller said, the guillotines will start appearing. And if you study the history of the French Revolution, you will remember that the bankers went to the guillotines before the royalty, and that wasn't just a coincidence of timing. But seizing on that 4.4% claimed unemployment, two GOP legislators have come on out with a bill to basically grant amnesty for migrants to put them into the workforce. They're calling it the American Replacement Bill plus amnesty. And the idea is that they're going to basically say that all of these illegal immigrants and refugees, they can go on out and they can take those jobs that Americans won't. Well, I don't think there are very many jobs Americans won't take. The problem is there aren't jobs to begin with. We do not have enough jobs for the American population by 90 million. And throwing the refugees and illegal immigrants into the job market is not going to make the situation better. It's just pandering to that New World Order globalist agenda, without regard to what the consequences are going to be for the member nations, or the individual nations, and sovereign people. Yes, it will cause suffering and misery, but that's a sacrifice I am willing to make for the dream of a one-world global government and a one-world private central bank holding all of mankind as debt slaves until the sun swells up and swallows the planet Earth. By the way, I'm looking on Fox News. Apparently, the Democrats are having a meltdown over the House passage of the new health care bill. So they're in a tizzy about that. Over at I'm looking at this article here. Why the U.S. should have a national health service and why it won't work without proper immigration enforcement. And basically what it's saying is along the lines of something Ron Paul said a long time ago. And that was, why are we trying to craft an Obamacare or Trump care or everything? Let's look at other countries that have a health system that works for the people and just copy what they're doing. Which would seem to make sense until you remember that the whole purpose of this government control and intervention is to force more money from the pockets of the people into the medical industrial complex. And a lot of people are saying, why don't we just go full Brit and create a national health service? And no, it won't be perfect. No system is. But it's certainly going to be better than what we have right now, where we have the most expensive health care on earth, and it's something like 36th in terms of quality. And it's not geared toward health. It's geared toward making money, selling products, some of which are ineffective, some of which are dangerous. And when you look at the latitude the medical industrial complex is given, I mean, no other business in the U.S. is allowed to collude on their pricing. No other industry in the U.S. is allowed to charge anything it wants without disclosing costs before delivering the service. No other industry is allowed to operate without competition. All of these things are illegal. There are laws against it, but they are not being enforced. We'll be back after these commercials. And And Aloha America, welcome back to the show here. And getting on over to the Brexit, the European Union does not want to abide by the EU agreement, the Title 50 part. They're trying to find some way they can justify saying, no, we're not going to let you go. You are our slaves forever, and forget about that Title 50 nonsense or Article 50. You know, you are ours, slave. So the EU is warning of impossible Brexit negotiations with Great Britain following UK Prime Minister Theresa May accusing Brussels of trying to meddle in the upcoming elections this summer. You know, how dare you say we're meddling? Well, that's just going to spoil the Brexit negotiations. They could go on for 200-300 years before anything actually happens. And now, of course, Brussels is demanding Great Britain pay the entire cost of the negotiations. If you want to leave, you will pay for the negotiations, air travel, hotel, all the rest of it. And that's on top of the 100 billion euro divorce settlement Brussels is demanding that Great Britain cough on up. And just to show you how petty these people can get, the European Union's Juncker, the top boss of it, says he's going to stop speaking English now because it's not an important language anymore. Go away. He will speak something else from now on. We're going to go ahead and take a couple of phone calls here. Bob in Las Vegas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I got in a little. Excuse me. I got in a little late. How you feeling today?
Actually, a lot better. Thank you.
That's good. You know, I have the Fed and North Korea on my mind. First, I'd like to thank Mike from Brazil for responding, and I look forward to hearing from him because I'm really looking at Brazil as a place that I'd like to move to, and I'm looking at Santa Catarina.
I don't know about Brazil. Costa Rica, a lot of people are recommending that right now. If Claire and I, well, you know, they're not part of BRICS, so they're not going to get attacked by the United States. Sooner or later, the United States is going to find a way to get into a war or overthrow the government of Brazil in order to get them out of the BRICS arrangement.
But I also worry about a potential nuclear war, and I'd rather be as far south as possible. I don't know if that makes a difference.
It might give you a little more time. That was kind of the basic storyline of the film On the Beach, that only at the start of it, only Australia is still survivable, but by the end of the movie, everybody's gone.
Yeah. Mike, on the Fed, have you heard anything about the this audit the Fed bill? Because I haven't heard a thing. And perhaps, you know, the Fed got to these senators and said, oh, we're going to crash the economy. But I don't know why these senators, like, you know, I guess because they're all in the pocket of the banksters, they don't say, okay, you're going to crash the economy, we're going to revoke your charter.
Probably because revoking the charter without having a replacement all set to go would be a very, very bad thing. There's certain pragmatism. Audit the Fed, it sounds really good during the election season, but again, the election is over, and our politicians are going to go back to doing what they're told by their real masters, which is the money power. Yeah, the last time that Ron Paul got the Audit the Fed bill going, the Federal Reserve did imply, if you try and audit us, we will crash the economy, or the economy will have devastating negative effects to the audit. But it was as much as a threat. And, of course, what Ron Paul wanted, what we the American people deserve, is a full and complete audit of the Federal Reserve so that we can find out just how much wealth the private central bank has extracted from the pockets of the American people for the last 100 years, all in exchange for ink, paper, printing presses, and some computers. Because it's going to be a phenomenal amount, and that is why the Federal Reserve fights the idea of an audit tooth and nail.
Don't we have a replacement already in existence? How the country's economy was governed before 1913? In a sense, the Treasury could just
yeah, but you'd have to print it up and have it warehoused before you took down the central bank. And some countries in Europe are already doing that. France never gave up the franc internally. Francs are accepted along with euros. A few years ago, Germany actually started printing up new franc notes, and they've got them warehoused in anticipation of the collapse of the euro. You have to plan for these things because there has to be enough currency for the entire population ready to go into circulation at a moment's notice before you pull the plug on the Federal Reserve. You know, before you burn the bridge behind you, you've got to build one in front of you.
Yeah. Lastly, on North Korea, did you notice that story? I mean, occasionally I'll go to Fox News website. There was this rather attractive North Korean this woman who was defected from North Korea. Basically, she was very critical of the regime. You know, the regime in Pyongyang, saying, "Oh, she's all for the U.S. going in there." And I wonder, where do they find these people? Is this woman a defector? I mean, who knows?
We don't know. We don't know. Remember the Kuwaiti nurse that got us into Operation Desert Storm?
Exactly.
And
the ambassador's daughter.
Yeah, she was really the ambassador's daughter. So yeah, they do lie that blatantly to us.
Right. Okay, Mike. Well, you guys have a great weekend.
All right, same to you. Thank you very much. And we're going to switch over to Brendan in San Francisco. Aloha, Brendan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Quick shout out to Bob in Las Vegas. Great questions. Listen, just a couple quick items. Lawrence Fishburne's daughter, by the way, she's in porn. Just thought you might find that funny. Steve Pieczenik addressed these doctors, these so-called doctors that were calling out Trump's mental stability, and he basically blasted those guys. It's a good video to watch. I took the liberty, I hope you don't mind, I started a crowdfund for move Mike and Claire back to the mainland, and it's the number 2 because they only give you so many spaces to write. So the GoFundMe again is move Mike and Claire back to mainland, number 2. I hope you don't mind I took the liberty of doing that.
Well, if it works, fine, but am I correct in thinking that if it fails to meet its objective, the money goes back to the people who sent it in, right?
Oh, sure. I'm sure
okay.
it does.
All right. I got to be very honest. Thank you for doing this. I'm a little nervous about this. Of course, you know, I'm terrible at asking for money and support, but thank you for setting it up. And certainly, if it works, Claire and I would be extraordinarily grateful.
Well, and the genesis of the idea was I heard Alex Jones mention that he is committed to starting a roundtable of different. I hate using the term alt-right or whatever, independent media. And you immediately popped to mind in the struggles of missing all the speaking engagements. And Claire, it immediately came to mind. And today I was just going to call in and ask you about it. And then I thought, well, let me just look at it. And then it was like, it looked pretty easy to set up. I've never done that before, but and I put your emails attached to it so you can keep track of whatever's happening. But I believe there's enough listeners out there. A $10 donation would easily meet the. I put a $50K as the amount, and I'm going to contribute to that as soon as I get off the phone. I wanted to mention Gene Sharp's How to Start a Revolution. It's a great video. Mm-hmm. I'm not too sure about his politics, but the video itself is interesting historically. And there's a lot of peer-to-peer things going on as far as bartering and trading and eliminating the middleman, like the banks, for example. And I think these are moves that we can make together to try to undermine this machine. And that's kind of where my head is at.
Okay. Well, you know, I get really chilled at the word revolution, but like I told that earlier caller, given that I am out of any ideas on how to change the course of the nation peacefully and legally, I'm accepting the reality that we may be seeing a revolution and a civil war. And I don't want that, but we have to acknowledge it is a very real possibility. And the more the government goes on with its current economic policies of looting and plundering the people for the benefit of the money junkies, and the further along it goes on with the war agenda, the probability of that kind of an event begins to increase. And that's not even taking into account whatever it is George Soros is trying to do with all of his paid provocateurs rioting all over the place.
Yeah, this is a nonviolent approach, and it lets you know how many people actually are like-minded with symbols and there was a whole series of banging pots and pans during the winter because it was so cold, but people from their balconies were banging pans, and throughout the whole city, they knew they had comrades that were on board. So nonviolent, and then I think we need to use the tactics of like boycotting products and calling in. I hear CBS got bombarded with thousands of calls calling for his firing of Colbert, and it started trending to get rid of that clown. I can't even stand listening to him for a second. But we need to find common ground with the so-called left, like-minded people. And once again, I'm totally anti-war. My dad was in Korea. He fought in Korea as a teenager. He actually lied about his age from Berlin, New Hampshire to Korea at the age of 16. And it really had an effect on my family. And I don't want to see this continue. I mean, it's time to take action. And if we can boycott products, call into CBS, and just find common ground with people that are at least have this one thing in common: anti-war. We can make things move. We can start something here.
Well, we all have common ground in one important point, and that is we all want lives of peace and prosperity, not just for ourselves but for our children. And that means we are definitely united in this opposition to any more wars of conquest. We're united in opposition to a political economic system that treats us as little more than walking wallets, and we can come together. And maybe that's what Soros is trying to do with all of his provocateurs, is keep the American population divided and angry with each other, because that was certainly part of the agenda back during COINTELPRO in the 1960s, not let the American people come together as an American people and then call on the government to start doing what the people want, because them's the rules. That's the way this country is supposed to be working. We're supposed to have a government that represents us and takes care of our nation and our people first and foremost. And we don't have that right now. We have an oligarchy that's in love with Israel and is totally out of control and feels that it is above the law and above reproach and unaccountable to the ordinary American citizen. And that is most assuredly not the nation that is described in that Constitution.
Yeah, if they're not in love with Israel, they're certainly compromised by them. I mean, I hear Epstein's possibly a Mossad agent, and it's the oldest trick in the book, this honey trap. That's why I think we should give these perverts a jubilee on prosecution and try to work with them and get these people out. We do need to vote a lot of these folks out. Also, I'm stocking up on my tar and feathers.
Yes.
And I'm going to have that handy to just start tar and feathering these politicians and local media. These local newscasters need to be shamed for promoting this garbage, rush to war and all that. Once again, it's move Mike and Claire back to the mainland. I'll let you go, Mike.
All right. Well, thank you very much here. Thank you for the efforts and the kind words. We're rushing toward the top of the hour. We're only going to take 2 more phone calls, and we've got to close the lines. Dan in Washington State, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thanks for taking the call. I just had a question for you about the BRIC system. Do you know if there was a plan with Nixon and China when he opened up China, since he knew that taking us off the gold standard would, fiat currencies don't last a long time? Was the BRIC system kind of part of a deal to eventually have a deal with China where they would take control of the global money system through that?
No. I mean, first of all, the United States did not want to give up control of the global money system. The same situation was there with Great Britain going into World War II. At the start of World War II, the British pound sterling was the global trade and banking currency, off of which the Bank of England profited handsomely. But Roosevelt's deal with Churchill was that he would bring the United States into the war against Nazi Germany, but only if Great Britain surrendered the pound sterling's position as the global trade and banking currency and allowed the U.S. dollar to take on over. And so Churchill finally agreed. Roosevelt set up the Pearl Harbor hoax to get us into the war against the Nazis through the back door of Japan. And then once it was all over, they had the meeting at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, which hammered out the details of the U.S. dollar being the global trade and banking currency. And then the U.S. proceeded immediately to break the restrictions that were in that agreement, which has led to the situation where Nixon had to end gold convertibility and then try and prop up international support for U.S. dollars by making the petrodollar deal with all the oil-producing nations. Sell your oil only for the dollar, invest the dollars back in the U.S. economy, and we will guarantee your safety militarily from Israel. And as more and more of the Middle Eastern countries are being attacked by Israel, they've come to understand the U.S. can't honor their half of the deal. And that's one of the reasons why Iraq said we want to sell our oil for the euro. It's one of the reasons why Libya wanted to sell their oil for the gold dinar. And so now the U.S. is trying to drag the world back to the petrodollar or Bretton Woods through at the point of a bayonet.
Okay, that was my question, and they got other callers, so thanks for taking the call.
All right, thank you. We're going to take one more phone call, then we're going to close the lines because I'm way behind in my talking points, and Claire's about to start. James in Tokyo, Ohio gozaimasu.
Ohio gozaimasu. How are you, Mike?
Genki desu. Anata wa?
Good. Watashi mo genki desu yo. I'm very impressed with you. The Gong Show and the mid 1970s the porno movies you've done with the mask over your head and the animation and the talk show. I'm just so impressed with you, Michael. I can't even tell you. You know?
Yeah, I think you're confusing me for somebody else with that mask over the head thing.
Hey, listen.
I lack the necessary dimensions, so to speak.
Well, me too. But anyway, I went to Kashimibaraki, which is Prefecture 2 away from Tokyo. They have Tokyo.
All right, James, I got to put you on hold. I'm sorry, put you on hold. Sit here for 3 minutes. I'm going to take the rest of your call when we come back from the commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're trying to get back to our caller. Let me scroll back up here because I lost sight of it. I have a little tiny window. Okay, we were talking with James in Tokyo. And James, what else did you want to say?
Well, I want to say two things. Well, first, I went to Kashima Ibaraki, where I have that beach house, and I checked everything out with my SOAKS dosimeter, and it's a pretty good one, $400 or $500, and I checked the ocean water, some fish, some vegetables, my land, and water that comes from a well that I own, and everything came out fine. There's no severe background radiation. It was even less in Tokyo. And this place is about 130 miles from the Fukushima incident. So I just want to tell you that. I mean, I'm just telling you the truth, what happened. But I'm back in Tokyo now. Anyway, I want to talk about a little bit about economics. I wouldn't do the Baltic Dry Index for any indicator of the economy. That's just something that has to do with the price of shipping rates. And
no, what the Baltic Dry Index is, it's a measure of the bulk shipment of raw materials to manufacturers. And that is the first indicator you have about where the economy is going to go. Because if the economy is improving and people are buying more products, then manufacturers need to make more products and they order more raw materials, and the Baltic Dry Index goes up. But the index is going down, which is a bad indicator.
Part of it, Michael, but it's also the cost of shipping. And there's other factors you need to consider, like the glut of ships that are currently present, the cost of fuel. So all these, glut of ships are competing for different contracts, and that's why, same thing with the ships like Seadrill and company, they're trying to drill just too many ships, and it's just something I just wouldn't base the economy on, but I would base it on like stuff about real people. I met someone earlier today who moved here from San Francisco, and she's like, Yeah, in San Francisco, I'm making $4,000 a month, but my rent is like $3,000, and I'm paying, and I have to pay a $700 fee for Obamacare because I can't afford it. And I'm here now, and I get free health care, but I make less, but rent is less, and I'm living better, and I don't think I want to go back. So, there are a lot of different things.
I think you're casting too wide a net. First of all, on the Baltic Dry Index, the cost of shipping isn't included in the calculation. The fact that there is a surplus of ships actually tends to push shipping costs down. It's when there's a shortage of ships that they go on up. But yeah, when you're considering where you want to live, it's not just a factor of how much you're going to earn, but how much it's going to cost you to live and what kind of a quality of lifestyle you will have for that money. And it is possible to live very well in places like Costa Rica on money that would leave you basically homeless here in the United States. So it's a complex issue. Anyway, listen, James, I'm going to have to let you go. We're coming up here on the top of the hour, and the lovely Lady Claire. We're going to close the phone lines for the rest of the show, so we're going to be back here soon with the Lady Claire. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. And as you can tell by watching on Bamuser, this gorgeous creature sitting off to my side is the lovely Lady Claire. Lady Claire, what are the first things you want to talk about?
Well, first, I am seeing this incredible rush to war on the part of the U.S. government. And it doesn't seem to matter where it starts. Syria, Korea, China, Russia, I don't know.
Monaco, Brazil, Cuba.
Andorra. But seriously, I feel things are coming to this incredible head, and we are going to see some very intense military conflicts wherever the deep state can get them started. Now, one interesting piece of news came to us from Zero Hedge, which is a very sober and intelligent blog. Apparently, the Chinese foreign minister unexpectedly skipped an Asian trade summit to attend an emergency meeting back home. Now, the way that Tyler Durden characterized this is that this is coming when traders and analysts are looking with growing concerns toward Beijing and riddled with what are called deja vu memories of the China-induced near bear market of 2016 in a similar episode where China's credit impulse tumbled. And something even PIMCO highlighted earlier this week. The minister in question is Zhao Jie, and I probably butchered his name, but that's as close as I can get. And he unexpectedly skipped a summit conference with his Japanese and South Korean peers on Friday to attend some sort of emergency domestic meeting. The officials told reporters during a ministry press briefing that Zhao's absence was not related to any diplomatic matters, adding that Zhao was expected to attend the China-Japan finance dialogue in Japan is scheduled for Saturday. And Mike, I gotta tell you, I am wondering if this reflects either a genuine economic problem for China, economic sabotage against it, or perhaps that sickening sure and certain knowledge that there are those in the American deep state who are contemplating a first strike nuclear assault against it, and that's why the THAAD system has been deployed in South Korea.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and that explains why China is very upset that the THAAD is there.
Yeah.
Now, I raised the possibility earlier in the show that China's economic hardship could just be what happens when you have a debt-based monetary system. But we know the United States government loves to play economic war against other countries.
Yeah.
They've been doing it in Venezuela. If you see the movie The Good Shepherd, which is actually quite accurate in some of the portrayals of CIA operations, where the banks will go into a country, loan them a bunch of money, then the CIA will go on in and sabotage the agriculture that the country was planning on repaying the loans with in order to keep the country in debt and under U.S. control.
Yeah.
So economic warfare, both overt and covert, is a reality of geopolitics, and it could very well be what's going on here. The problem is that economic wars have a very, very bad habit of turning into real shooting wars.
Right, right. And another article from when the hits the fan. what the North Korean crisis is really about. Is it a pretext to nuke both Russia and China? And this is Paul Craig Roberts, again, a very sober observer and former government official. And he's asking, what is the demonization of North Korea by the prostitutes in Trump administration about? And he explains this by saying that it is about the same thing that the demonization of Iran was about. The Iran threat was an orchestration that was used to cover up the placement of U.S. anti-ballistic missiles on Russia's border. An anti-ballistic missile, ABM, is intended to intercept and destroy nuclear-armed ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and prevent them from reaching their targets. Washington claimed that the anti-ABM bases were not directed at Russia, but were there for the protection of Europe against Iran's nuclear ICBM. Now, some Americans who are a little bit fact-challenged may believe this, but the Russians surely understood that Iran doesn't have the ICBMs or nuclear weapons.
Well, even more importantly, the location where these anti-ballistic missile installations were put in didn't make sense in the context of a threat from Iran towards Europe. The placements would have been much more appropriate on Europe's borders further to the south or over closer to Iran. But placing them on the border with Russia, they really didn't fool anybody.
No, they didn't. And it's very clear to Russian leadership that these U.S. bases are directed at preventing a Russian retaliation against a Washington first strike. And, Mike, I've got to tell you that for so many years now, I have been utterly appalled at the quality of thinking from the American deep state and government, no matter who allegedly runs the country. And I also have to share that after President Trump's flip-flops, which gave me mental whiplash, I can assure you, not really the guy in charge. It's like that archetypical dream of a slow-mo train wreck from which I cannot awaken. But I have to say, even contemplating a nuclear first strike against both Russia and China is horrifically, insanely hubristic in a way I can't even begin to describe. And to the Russian and Chinese governments who may have elements monitoring this show, thinking, moral Americans would never, ever want such a war to happen. Please understand that the American people are no longer in control of their own destinies, but those destinies are in large part scripted by the American deep state, where hegemony über alles rules supreme, no matter how many people are going to get killed.
Well, it's, again, it does appear like there has been a plan for quite some time for the U.S. to conquer the world, and the two major obstacles to that are Russia and China. And along with the placement of the anti-ballistic missiles, the bolstering of our nuclear arsenal, we have to look at the elevated program of building underground bunkers for the government that we have seen going back 15, 20 years, including the one that's here in the middle of the H3. We know that the government has their taxpayer-funded bunkers, the Greenbrier, Mount Weather, a whole bunch of others. We know that Cheyenne Mountain has been reactivated. We know that there's an underground facility under the new Denver airport, and in part it's causing subsidence problems for the airport itself. So somebody failed on their engineering on that one. So if they make a mistake and the Russians and Chinese do retaliate, they'll just hunker down in their bunker and say, oh, well, we made a mistake, too bad. But for the rest of us up here, we're going to have to deal with that. But again, the sociopaths who naturally gravitate to the very top of the political scene, they are oblivious to the harm that they cause to others. It's not that they don't want to see it. They psychologically can't. It's invisible to them. And before I let you continue, we're going to go on over and do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. And what is the next thing you want to talk about?
Well, apparently a victory for Theresa May in the UK may see Britain dragged further towards war with Russia. Now, there have been, even though there's been a vote in Vlad Putin, I don't think, is going to back down. What do you think?
Well, at some point, we're in a terrible replay of the lead up to World War II, where Neville Chamberlain went on over to Nazi Germany after the Sudetenland and basically said, well, we're going to appease you. You can keep what you've conquered, and we will have peace in our time. And everybody remembers what a horrible mistake that was for Britain to make. So Russia and China and all those nations on the earth that are not already under U.S. domination, they know what's coming. There is a grand plan for the United States to conquer the entire world. It was even set out in the Project for the New American Century. The attitude that was on display is the United States is the only remaining superpower. We should act like one. And at some point, all those other nations, Russia and China, are going to unite together and say, no, we don't want to have a war, but if the alternative to war is enslavement to the New World Order, then we're ready to put up the fight. And I think we're getting dangerously close to that line.
Well, it was reported in this article that last month, Vladimir Putin was told by the UK ambassador to the UN, Matthew Rycroft, that he, Putin, is on the wrong side of history because of his support for the quote-unquote barbaric Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad. Rycroft added that supporting the Assad regime would result in shame and humiliation for Russia. U.S. and NATO being civilized forces in a barbaric world?
Well, Rycroft is...
I mean, come on. What British Ministry of Truth intern cobbled that bit of codswallop for Rycroft to read, I have to wonder.
Rycroft is coming from the point of view that following a major war, the victors get to write the history books. And these other people were all bad and shameful, and we were good and righteous. And you go back and you realize that the United States and Great Britain were not all that innocent of war crimes in World War II, and the Nazis were not as evil as they're portrayed. But being able to write the history books and tell future generations what to believe is one of the perks of winning the war. But of course, if the U.S. doesn't win this war, the history books are going to say something much, much, much different.
Very different. And the truth of what Rycroft said is the polar opposite of the statement he made. And all you have to do is look objectively at the U.S. government-generated carnage in Iraq, still going on, Libya, still going on, Afghanistan, still going on, Somalia. We had people dead and wounded today in Somalia, Yemen and Syria to understand this. The hard reality to me, Mike, is that the U.S. and U.K. are utterly not on the right side of history to look at attempting to regime change Damascus. And I really shudder to think what the Russians will do when the hits the fan. Because Russia is in Syria at the behest of the Syrian government.
Well, I don't know if you picked up on this, but Russia, Iran, and Turkey just signed this agreement to create these safe spaces inside Syria, and Russia has already informed the United States that U.S. coalition aircraft will not be allowed to overfly those safe spaces. Now, obviously, the United States is not going to want to go along with that, and it's just one step closer to a direct confrontation between Russia and the United States. And basically, the goal for the United States is to get the war cranked on up before the economic collapse so that they can blame the economic collapse on the war. But they understand that the American people will not support a war unless they are tricked into believing that the other side has caused it. And that is true certainly in Syria. It's true in the run-up to war with Russia and China. It's what they're doing over in North Korea. Oh, how dare they build defensive weapons to stop us from invading them. They are in the wrong. We must invade.
We saw a very interesting documentary about hysterical group thinking yesterday, by the way. Do you remember that Josh Gates Destination Unknown that we saw?
Oh, yeah.
This, folks, number one, it's a lovely travelogue on Travel Channel. If you haven't seen it, you might want to record it. But he went to Romania and Bulgaria, where there are certain practices that are believed to make people feel well if someone has died and they get ill, the people left in the village. And what they did with these carcasses was pretty terrible, you know. But then they all, this gets a little bit dicey. Let's just say that there was a concoction that they drank, all of the people who were ill after this gentleman's death, and they got better. Now, the only thing I can ascribe that to is hysterical belief. But what the people in D.C. want you to do is to embrace that same hysterical, magical thinking and belief.
Yes.
And it's just a question of a different face on the same process.
And, it's not that far removed from our present situation. If you go back to World War II, the Nazi wolf pack, the Youth Corps, the shock troops, there's actually a spring in the Harz Mountains of Germany that German legend says if you drink from that spring, you will turn into a werewolf. And Adolf Hitler, who was really big into the occult and symbology, when you were recruited into the wolf pack, you were given a little vial of that water to drink as part of your initiation. Now, to the best of our knowledge, none of them actually turned into a werewolf. But they believed in the magic, and when they were juiced up on the methamphetamine that the Nazis invented as a war drug, that's what made the Blitzkrieg so effective.
Absolutely. Want to turn my attention to an article that's not getting a whole lot of coverage in the U.S. Apparently, Indian troops have been blocking Kashmir villages amid rebels' hunts. And we're talking about thousands of soldiers and paras who were engaged in a huge operation in India-administered Kashmir, where armed rebels have repeatedly attacked government forces in recent weeks. And one of the gentlemen who was the Deputy Inspector General of Police, Mr. Pani, told the AFP News, this is an unprecedented operation, and made the observation, it is impossible to capture the militants, but we hope there will be contact, exchange of fire with them in the course of the day. And apparently suspected rebels, no due process, no trial, are frequently assassinated in shootouts with security forces in Kashmir, but rarely captured alive. And I have a word to say to the government and military leadership of India, please. Through these actions, you are collectively throwing petrol on an already roaring fire. Because only at the end of the day, in the spirit of sober and honorable and moral reflection, can the issue of the fate of Kashmir be resolved by the Kashmiris, Pakistani, and the Indian leadership working together. What they are doing now, Mike, is an absolute recipe for utter disaster and may potentially cause a revolution that their military forces may well not be able to put down. I mean, Kennedy said it best, when peaceful revolution is impossible, violent revolution is inevitable.
Well, in the case with Kashmir, there's no common meeting ground among all these disparate parties. They want what they want, the others want the other thing. And from their point of view, it's already a war. It's not declared, and they're acting like it's already a war. And where it gets really dicey is that both India and Pakistan are nuclear powers.
That could get dicey. I'm hoping that some cooler heads are going to prevail. It sounds like this area needs another Gandhi.
Well, I think so. The whole world needs a cool down. And maybe that coming ice age ought to get here a little bit faster.
That would be nice. That would be nice. I'd like to bop on over to the Middle East again and talk about Saudi Arabia and Yemen, again getting almost no coverage here in the States. Their expected military assault on Yemen will almost certainly cause mass starvation. 3 years into this war, the UN says that the Arab world's poorest country is suffering one of the worst humanitarian crises on the planet, and that a total famine is imminent. A famine that may well be accelerated with the help of U.S. President Donald Trump.
I've heard it described as a biblical crisis, a famine of biblical proportions.
For the past couple of years, the U.S. has been providing Saudi Arabia-led coalition with intelligence and logistical support for its relentless airstrikes, which the UN has said has been responsible for most of the country's 4,800 deaths. I think that figure is very conservative.
It's important to point out those are civilian deaths. We're not talking about the actual combatants. We're not talking about the Yemens who are actively trying to kick out their puppet rulers. All right.
We're going to continue with this after the break.
Okay. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And actually, don't call the number because we're still closing the phone lines while we get caught up on the news here. What is? So we're talking about Yemen. We're talking about the humanitarian disaster, which, by the way, is not unique to Yemen. Every place the United States goes on into, people suffer and die. The experts are saying that since the end of World War II, after World War II is all over, the United States government has murdered 20 million people in 37 different countries.
Yeah.
But remember, Russia's the threat.
Yeah.
North Korea's the threat.
Yeah, I hear you. And because of the fact that the Yemeni ports are blocked, Yemenis kids are dying of malnutrition, slow, painful, horrible death. And yet it seems to be no big deal to the Saudi military, the House of Saud, or apparently the U.S. government. But, I mean,
this... Oh, just the cost of doing business.
Yeah, And, by the way, Prince Salman of Saudi Arabia, sir, I'm calling you out for this. You need to know better. And absolute shame on you. They're using depleted uranium weapons in Yemen, and these weapons, Mike, are having exactly the same effect that they did in Fallujah, where thousands of people and thousands of babies had this horrible response with birth defects in the womb.
And also our returning veterans. Our returning veterans are exposed to this. Depleted uranium is the gift that keeps on giving. Even worse than a pregnant cat.
Yeah. And for the U.S. having been complicit in Saudi war crimes in Yemen for the past 2 years, the Pentagon only sees the assassination of innocent civilians with their victory at Hodeidah, which is going to be the next port that the Saudis are going to invade with American help and probably boots on the ground.
And they call it collateral damage. Well, remember, it's only going to be a war crime if they lose the war and face the consequences afterwards.
And what this reminds me of historically, there was a siege from the Papal Army to the town of Montsegur against the Cathars. And upon being informed that women and children were holed up with the guys, what the Papal Legate said, kill them all. God will find his own. It feels like that to me in this conflict. And we need now to talk about Afghanistan. And the Pentagon is pitching a revised war plan to President Trump next week. And in the latest series of proposals, a new series of options, how many guys, at the largest, it was 5,000 or more U.S. troops and 13,000 NATO troops being deployed. But, they don't know what else to do because nothing they have done so far has worked. So I have a little word for President Trump. Even if he signs off, Mike, on a major escalation in Afghanistan, including 5,000 U.S. troops and 13,000 NATO troops 16 years on, when do the Pentagon staffers tell you by what time this war will actually be won if we haven't been able to do it in 16 years? I mean, that's crazy making to me.
Well, some of these wars that the U.S. has gotten into can't be won anyway. And a good example of that is the war in Iraq, which we were told was all about Saddam's nuclear weapons, which didn't exist. Saddam helping the terrorists that did 9/11, which even George Bush said they had nothing to do with it. And Iraq's support for Al-Qaeda, which was nonsense because Al-Qaeda favors religious rule and Saddam's was the only secular government in the entire area. So given that the actual objectives we are told for a war are lies, they can never be achieved. And hence, they really can't say the war was won. That's why they go to the euphemisms like mission accomplished. And the war is over and done with. But they really can't say that they won. They probably will, but there's no basis for it.
And my question is, are the U.S. government and NATO going to spend yet another 16 years doing what they have done, which hasn't worked, yet expecting a different outcome? Because, Mike, you and I know that's the classic definition of insanity.
Well, the problem is there hasn't been an outcome yet. It's just dragging along and dragging along, quagmire and quagmire. And I think we're pouring resources and people into some of these countries purely so that the U.S. won't be forced to say, well, we lost that one. And I think that is a big reason why we had this situation in Syria. It was almost over. False flag attack. The war is on. We got to take a break for commercials. I got to look at some system issues at this end. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And what is the next thing you want to talk about?
Well, I wanted to spend a little bit more time with this issue of the Pentagon pitching the president, which I think is a lousy term to use. That's, you know, if you've got a screenplay and you're trying to get it greenlit. But this is real people.
Yeah, they're selling a war. Yeah. And one of the areas in which I'm certainly disappointed in Donald Trump is he seems to have delegated the military foreign policy of the United States to the Pentagon. Now, the Pentagon, like the bankers, they love war because it means money, it means promotion, it means new toys. So you're never going to have anybody from the Pentagon stand up and say, you know, maybe let's call this war off. It's always push for victory or death. My victory is somebody else's death.
Right. But in my perspective and analysis, Mike, there has been way too much blood and money spent here. But the ultimate geopolitical objectives have not been realized. And in my head, and I want you to kind of work with me on this, what I think that the U.S. government and NATO should be doing is pulling their forces out of Afghanistan just as quickly as they can do it safely, then negotiating with whatever government is left standing in Kabul for the pipeline and mineral rights. Because that was what it was all about originally.
And the opium.
Yes,
and
that
the
too.
opium.
Yes,
okay.
yeah.
And what it came on down to is the oil companies who wanted that pipeline right of way, they had a consortium, and they went to the government of Afghanistan under the Taliban, and the Taliban said, we're willing to lease you the pipeline right of way for the going price for a pipeline right of way. And the oil company consortium went to the United States Congress, this is back in the 1990s, and they said, we need that pipeline, but we don't feel we should have to pay the full fair market price. It'll actually be cheaper if we go on in and conquer the country and then put in a puppet ruler who will give us the pipeline right of way for pennies on the dollar. And, of course, that's exactly what happened. And one of the members of that oil company consortium who went before Congress and begged them for a war to change the government of Afghanistan was Hamid Karzai, who was a consultant for the Unocal Corporation.
Mr. Slick himself.
Mr. Slick himself, and he wound up as the installed puppet ruler of Afghanistan, and the oil companies got their pipeline right of way, and American drug lords got a new source of high-quality opium, because under the Taliban, Afghanistan had eradicated the opium poppies. If you were caught with a poppy, they'd cut your hand right off. A little draconian, but it did work. And ever since the U.S. has gone on in, the poppies are blooming, and there's a bumper crop, and the opium is just flowing into the streets of America and of the rest of the world. And we have photographs of these coalition forces, including the ones with the American flag shoulder patch, guarding and protecting the opium poppies and actually holding and loading onto trucks the sacks of the raw opium for processing. And so that's a big part of what's going on. And for a lot of Americans who've not been paying attention, it comes as a shock to find out that the biggest drug smuggler in the entire country is the country.
Yeah, pretty rough. I'd like to expand a little bit on something you covered earlier. Pentagon is seeking to link Iran and North Korea, citing similar-looking missiles. You know.
And they also had a similar-looking submarine. Oh, yes, a similar-looking. It's a tube, and it's got a pointy thing on top. That's it. That's the link right there.
I've got to tell you, when I read this, I had an industrial-strength Jean-Luc Picard double facepalm upon reading this, and at warp speed, because apparently at the Pentagon there is not a single solitary person, Mike, who understands the concept of form following function.
Yes.
Because given what a missile is supposed to do, it would be obvious that the Iranian and Korean missiles would look somewhat similar because they were engineered to achieve the same objective, even without any sharing of technology. And Mike, one other issue that no one seems to want to ask. Why in the name of heck would Iran want to be reaching out to North Korea for such technology, which the North Koreans have extensive problems with in terms of staging and guidance? Come on. This accusation is ludicrous on the face of it.
Yeah, it really is, and it's just another attempt. It's a part of the forerunner of the run-up to we must invade Iran because they have a Death Star.
Yeah.
And again, it's a repeating pattern. Oh, they've got horrible weapons. They're in cahoots with our enemies. We have a moral right to go in and destroy their country before they destroy us. But again, I dare anybody to show me on a map of the United States of America where any country has actually attacked us, whether it's Iran, Syria, or North Korea. I mean, let's be honest. The last actual attack on U.S. soil took place right out this office window. December 7th, 1941.
Pearl Harbor.
Right. Yeah. And yes, the Japanese did succeed in some of their balloon firebombs, setting some trees on fire in Washington and Oregon. But other than that, we have not had an enemy nation attack us. And I know I'm going to get emails saying, well, we were attacked on 9/11. No, it was a false flag. It was a hoax. Just like the Lusitania, just like Saddam's nuclear weapons, just like Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, lie after lie after lie after lie after lie after lie. Why are you so gullible?
I hear you. I hear you. And let's take a look at another spot in Africa, and that's Libya. Sex slavery, ISIS, and illegal arms trade. Libya has now been plunged into a failed state situation after the U.S. invasion. Which is amazing, because if you find any documentaries of what Libya was like just before the U.S. went on in there to eradicate the state central bank and the gold dinar and make sure Libya's oil was sold only for the U.S. dollar, it was a beautiful place. It had one of the highest standards of living in all of Africa. Yeah. It was a very literate society. Gasoline was 25 cents a gallon. Whoa. And the free education. Yeah. It was really a beautiful, beautiful place. And they had this amazing infrastructure, water. The aquifers. The aquifers. Yeah. They tapped into them. They had the aqueducts. They were greening up Libya. And it was doing really well. And then the U.S. goes on in and says, well, you're not allowed to have your own currency. And they kill Gaddafi. They take down the state central bank. They put up a private central bank. The gold for the gold dinar has vanished. And Libya's oil is back on the world market only for the U.S. dollar. And I would like to make a point here. And I want everyone listening and watching to please remember, the current horrific state of affairs is a direct consequence of then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, who was cheerleading for the ouster of Gaddafi. And it's painfully obvious, looking at her legacy here, that she didn't have the intellectual capacity to think the scenario through to its logical conclusion about what would actually happen to the people of Libya once Gaddafi's assassination had been accomplished. Or she didn't care, because the real reason for his ouster was not something publicly stated. It was his gold dinar, which would have devastated the U.S. dollar. You need to understand, people like that, they don't care how their actions hurt ordinary people. That's a hallmark of a sociopathic personality. Yep. They are oblivious to the suffering their actions caused. They're just centered on themselves and what they want, and what they want is what they want, and they think it's a natural law, and anybody who gets in their way is obviously the enemy. Again, look at all the massive amount of killing, torture, crippling, destruction of heritage sites. And again, yes, we have all these really, really crazy people, and they do what they do because they absolutely are incapable of seeing the pain and suffering that they cause. That's the definition of a true sociopath, That's right? Absolutely it. And, for Hillary to sit there and say, we saw he died, and cackle like the Wicked Witch of the West, I think that was one of the things that helped her lose the election last year, because it is such a callous thing to do. And again, the people of the United States of America understood to some degree that Libya was not a threat to the United States of America. It was a threat to the Federal Reserve. And I think the American people are getting very tired of seeing their children being killed and crippled in service to a private central bank, which in turn seems to have zero concern for the economic well-being of the American people. From their point of view, we are just here to be plundered. We are walking wallets. The only reason they allow us to live is to generate more wealth for them and to breed the next generation of workers and soldiers. Yeah, it's pretty grim out there, and unfortunately, I'm afraid that the grimness hasn't really stopped. I'd like to get a little closer to home. Chicago right now, under the watch of Rahm Emanuel, is a war zone. Police suicide rate surges to 60% above the national average. And they talked about a gentleman who had dreamed about becoming a police officer to help others, but working in the violence-stricken Chicago law district, he came face-to-face with the city's violent crime and wound up killing himself. It's absolutely insane, Michael, and I noticed that there is not one mention of the city's mayor, Rahm Emanuel, but there should be. Now, last November, after the election, and he knew that Hillary was not going to win, he declared that Chicago was and would always be a sanctuary city for illegal immigrants. I guess he also meant the gang members from the MS-13 from El Salvador.
And let us not forget that Chicago is the model for gun control across America. No law-abiding citizen is allowed to have a gun. Only the criminals are going to have the guns.
Yeah, right. As with many urban inner-city communities, in Chicago you've got a broken, ruptured infrastructure and broken, disruptive families. Sometimes the gangs are all kids have to give them a feeling of belonging and a place in this world. Now, what I'm going to say here is going to sound very radical, but everybody, stay with me if you would. What this country should do is completely decriminalize all drugs, take the profit motive out of it. Okay? That is going to absolutely take down the gangs to a degree. Then we have to take our children back to some sort of positive kind of family existence, which is warm, loving, and structured and comforting.
Okay, I'd like to insert a comment here.
Yeah.
What you're describing would work. Yeah. And in my travels around the world, I've been to countries where these drugs, if they're not totally legal, they're decriminalized.
Yeah, like Portugal.
In some cases, if you are a registered addict, you will be given the drugs for free. And it has resulted in much, much lower crime related to drugs. The reason we have a drug problem is because drugs are incredibly profitable. And when you have a government that is itself profiting from the illicit drug trade, courtesy of the Central Intelligence Agency, then they are going to structure the laws to maximize their profitability. Let me give you a little insight from history. During Prohibition, when the U.S. government outlawed alcohol, the gangs that were dealing in alcohol, all of a sudden their product went from a few pennies a bottle to hundreds of dollars a gallon.
Yep.
And they were making insane amounts of money. And yes, the crime was going up and the gangs are going up. And almost immediately started seeing people saying, we need to repeal Prohibition because of the damage it's causing to our society. And then all of a sudden there were all these organizations out there, you know, the temperance people, and saying, no, this is a good thing. We've got to ban alcohol. We've got to keep it illegal. And what most people didn't understand is these organizations that were working to keep Prohibition in place were being funded by the rum runners and the bootleggers in order to keep their profits up.
And it's really ironic when you're talking about that period of history. Women had just been given the vote in this country. And what do? They push their government toward prohibition.
Yeah, and it was a mistake. But the point I'm making is that we're never going to see the drug laws in this country really do anything that will reduce the problem, because too many people in our own government, in the CIA, are profiting from it. And what's really amazing is corporate media is now starting to talk about this. There is a new series coming out on the History Channel about the CIA running drugs into this country to fund off-the-books operations. And they talk about Kun Sa's heroin during Vietnam. They're talking about the cocaine that was coming up as part of the Iran-Contra scandal, which is basically that hub around which the Bush-Clinton duopoly is organized. And everybody who's helped the CIA run the drugs or launder the money, Director Comey, they're all part of this situation. They don't want anything to change because they are making huge amounts of money off of your drug-addicted children. And inevitably, we're now starting to see even the legal drug industry is starting to behave like the drug criminals with intents to deliberately addict you to opiates. We were talking about where this one pharmaceutical company, the two chief executives, were arrested for colluding with doctors to overprescribe the opiates in order to addict patients to them. So it's getting hard to tell the difference between the legal and illegal drugs. Mm-hmm. It's a global problem. And as long as we have a government that is participating in those profits, they're not going to let anything change because money rules this world.
Yeah.
It's a dumb way to run a planet, but that's where we are right now.
That's sort of it. I'd like to take another look at our military right before the end of the segment. And apparently, our elite troops are being worked too hard and spread too thin. And the breakneck pace at which the U.S. deploys its special operation forces to conflict is taking a toll, their top commander said yesterday. Army General Raymond Thomas, commander of U.S. Special Ops Command, called the rate at which Special Ops forces are being deployed unsustainable and said the growing reliance of the U.S. military on these elite troops could produce a dangerous strain. Now, he said to the Armed Services Committee, we're not a panacea. We're not the ultimate solution to every problem, and you will not hear that coming up. I was surprised at the numbers, Mike. 8,000 U.S. Special Forces are currently deployed in more than 80 countries. Many are at the forefront of advising missions in Syria and Iraq, as well as counter-terror missions in Afghanistan. There are 500 special operators in Syria.
Well, first of all, you need to understand about the Special Forces. They are like the legions of Rome, very expensive to train. They have a lot of training that is certainly over and above what a military conscript would get in basic training. Mm-hmm. These are people who have made the decision to be combat troops professionally as a chosen career. Mm-hmm. And they are hard to recruit. The Special Forces are very selective. You've seen the stories about what the people who want to be Navy SEALs go through to get in there. Yeah. They're justifiably proud of being in the Special Forces. The problem is because the United States does not have a surplus of ordinary troops, that they're using the Special Forces everywhere, even in cases where they're not really needed. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, welcome back to our show, last segment of our Pauhana Friday program, and you had an important story that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, it was FBI Director Comey's very unsettling argument for why WikiLeaks doesn't deserve First Amendment protection. Now, he was in a hearing, during a Senate Judiciary hearing, and he attempted to distinguish WikiLeaks from outlets like the New York Slimes or the Washington Compost. He acknowledged the First Amendment rights journalists have, while arguing that WikiLeaks does not engage in journalism.
Well, there's a little bit of a sneaky business going on here because they're trying to figure out how they can arrest and prosecute WikiLeaks for publishing leaked information, but leave the corporate media alone, which has in the past also published leaked information. Yes. And so they're trying to build that case that WikiLeaks isn't real journalism, therefore the First Amendment does not apply. And Comey is being dishonest here, because if you read that First Amendment, it doesn't just say freedom of the press, it says freedom of speech. Yes. And WikiLeaks is speaking out, it is truth-telling, it is blowing the whistle on government wrongdoing, which is what the corporate media used to do but won't do anymore. And so this is a very facile argument that Comey is trying to make. But then again, Comey is letting Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin walk on felony Title 18 violations, saying that he doesn't think they meant to do harm, even though the letter of the law says intent is not a factor. So, and again, you need to remember something about Comey. When HSBC was laundering drug money, probably CIA drug money, Comey was on their board of directors, and he had to know what was going on. So he's part of that cartel. He's part of the narcocracy.
It's an incestuous little group, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
You know.
Maybe that's why they're producing so many brain-damaged offspring.
Ouch. But what WikiLeaks has done is to inform the American public about the actions of its government and embarrass various agencies for their agendas, lack of candor, with regard to what they are doing and why they're doing it. That's something that U.S. government and its agencies hates to see happen and will not tolerate. And Comey's prattling on about his and his colleagues' alleged respect for the First Amendment, because all of us care deeply about the First Amendment and the ability of a free press to get information about our work and publish it, is complete and utter codswallop.
Well, you know, Comey can say he's in favor of a free press because right now the press is controlled by the U.S. government.
Right.
What he's trying to do is find a way of shutting down any media that's not under the control of the government, because the American people are abandoning the corporate media.
Yep.
Their audience numbers are in decline. Their ad revenues are in decline. They're coming on over to the independent media, to WikiLeaks, to Republic Broadcasting, to WhatReallyHappened.com, and they're finding out the real nature of their government, and they're waking up and realizing how they have just been suckered their entire life with lie after lie after lie to control them, to plunder their wealth, to send their children off to wars of conquest. And people are pretty much fed up at this point. And as one of the earlier callers said, or I replied to a caller, I don't want to see a civil war or a revolution in the streets of this country, but at this point I have to accept it's a real possibility, and we need to prepare for that. There's the music. Time for Claire and I to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back Monday here on the Republic Broadcasting Network, so have yourselves a really good weekend. Happy Cinco de Mayo, and we'll be back Monday. Aloha, America.